Okay, I'm Steve Wallace. I'm your town planner. I've been a professional community planner now for 37 years, 10 years in New Hampshire, 27 years in Massachusetts. The bulk of my experience has been helping towns that have 10,000 people or less bring their zoning from the 21st century, from the 20th century into the 21st century. So that's what I'm here to do, is help modernize your zoning bylaw. Is there anyone here tonight who came specifically to hear about MBTA zoning? Anyone? Okay, good. So no pitchforks. The deal with that is now that the Milton decision has been rendered and the state has affirmed the MBTA zoning law, it's a matter of the affected towns need to adopt that multifamily housing zoning district, or they're going to get sued and they're going to lose access to a variety of state grants. Mr. Gettins.
Yes, Mr. Wallace, among other things, I happen to be a lawyer. And I've also happened to read the SJC decision twice. And in the town of Milton decision twice, the SJC said that the multifamily zoning districts, MBTA multifamily zoning districts, must be within 1/2 mile of an MBTA train or transit station. We have no land within 1/2 mile of an MBTA train station or transit station. And it behooves the town of Sterling to bring a court action for an injunction to enjoin the Mass Office of Housing and Livable Communities, to enjoin them from trying to enforce their bogus guidelines.
Yep.
And it's about time the Sterling Select Board summoned up some guts to bring that kind of a lawsuit.
So,
You know damn well that the SJC announced that explicit 1/2 mile limit.
yeah, and that's for direct towns with MBTA stations.
Your MBTA
No.
adjacent.
We have, it says that they have to be within the statute is clear. The districts must be within 1/2 mile of a transit or train station. That means walking distance. There is no reference to adjacent communities in the statute. So it behooves you to uphold the statute by filing a court action for an injunction.
I do believe it's fairly ridiculous to apply this law to Sterling. The nearest train station is North Leominster, 10 miles away.
It's Nashua Street, it's at least 6 or 7 miles.
Yep.
Okay? So let's stop the weasel words. It behooves you to bring a lawsuit to enforce the clear words of the statute and the SJC decision.
Okay, so that would be a decision for the select board,
And they won't make it.
and I can't make it for them. So what we're going to do is I'm going to be working with town council, taking a closer look at the Northgate area, which is the area of in the northwest portion of town next to Leominster, where the Northgate Housing District or the housing complex is. We're going to take a closer look at that and see if we can make that work. And if we can, we'll be bringing it back to the people for a special town meeting in November or December. So that's what the deal is with the MBTA zoning.
So get some concepts like the town of Holden Select Board.
Duly noted. Next slide. So how many people were at the economic development forums we held last March? Okay, and how many people were at the forum we held in November? All right, my apologies, you're going to hear a lot of the same information, but I think it's important that we all work from the same base of knowledge. So tonight we're going to cover economic development and your tax bills, costs of community services, the planning board zoning update effort, and an overview of the zoning proposals that we're going to bring to the town meeting in May. Benefits of economic development. Creates jobs, hopefully living wage jobs. It also stabilizes local tax rates. Studies have proven that economic development generates more in tax revenue than it costs the town to provide services for. So towns with a significant amount of economic development, it helps take the burden off of homeowners to pay the full freight for town government and schools. Promotes housing stability. If you've got a good job, then you can afford your home and you're likely to stay there longer. Nobody likes moving. Also promotes family stability. If you've got a good job and you've got a good home that you've stayed at for a while, odds are you've got a stable family situation. And lastly, it strengthens community fabric. If you've got a good job, a steady housing situation, and you're in town for a while, odds are you're going to want to give back to your community, whether it be joining a local civic organization, volunteering for youth sports, volunteering at the senior center or the library, or volunteering for one of the many boards, commissions, and committees that run this town. Towns like Sterling are run by primarily volunteers. Sure, you've got your support staff at town hall every day, but it's the elected decision makers and your volunteers that drive where this town goes. Cost of community service studies, what are they? Such studies attempt to estimate how much it, go back. It attempts to estimate how much it costs a municipality to provide services to various types of land uses versus how much these uses generate in tax revenue. These studies are typically prepared by institutions of higher learning, civic organizations, and municipal bureaus. Now, I've looked at the results of over 250 cost of community service studies from all over the country, and the finding is clear. Economic development generates more in tax revenue than it costs the town to service. Next. Okay, the American Farmland Trust prepared a cost of community service study for Sterling specifically back in 2009. And here's what they found. For every tax dollar generated by residential development, it costs the town $1.09 to provide services for. So that's a net negative of 9 cents per tax dollar. There's really only one type of housing that pays more in taxes than it costs to service. Anybody want to hazard a guess as to what type of housing? Somebody? Anybody? Senior housing. And why is that?
No kids in school.
Thank you for playing. Correct answer. For every tax dollar generated by commercial and industrial development, it costs Sterling 26 cents to service. That's a net plus of 74 cents for every tax dollar. And for every tax dollar generated by farming and open space, it costs the town 34 cents to service, a net plus of 66 cents per tax dollar. Now, this study might be 16 years old, but I guarantee you if we ran it again today, it might switch by a few cents here and there, but the overall trend is going to remain the same. Economic development provides more in tax revenue than it costs to service. So, Sterling has several disadvantages for economic development. No municipal sewer. 38% of our land is permanently protected and can never be built on. About a quarter of the town is regulated by the State Watershed Protection Act. Your commercially zoned land is slowly being eaten up by residential development. Sterling is one of the few towns I've seen that allows residential development in their commercial districts. More on that later. At present, you've only got 20 acres left of buildable commercially zoned land, and your permitting system is lengthy and disjointed. All is not lost. We have some advantages as well. Municipal water. We've got good highway access. It's easy to get to I-190 and Route 2. You've got a great municipal light department that offers excellent high-speed internet service. You've got a local economic development committee. Sterling is a member of the award-winning North Central Massachusetts Chamber of Commerce, and we work with them very closely. And you've got many colleges in central Massachusetts that provides graduates for new jobs and sparks innovation. So here's the reality check. Growth is coming to Sterling whether you want it or not. If a town, I know that there's a contingent in this community that wants to pull up the drawbridge and say, no more development, we're full. And I'm here to tell you that legally you can't do that. If towns could do that, don't you think other towns in Massachusetts would have done that by now? So if we know growth is going to come regardless, you're left with two options. Sit back and let it happen without a plan, or wisely plan to accommodate future growth while still retaining your community character. If you choose the latter, which I hope you do, working off a 45-year-old zoning bylaw isn't going to cut it. So, next slide, please. That's why one of the first things I pitched to the town was updating its zoning bylaw. Your current bylaw is out of date, poorly written, confusing, contradictory. So I pitched the idea that we do the zoning update in-house, thus saving the town a boatload of money. But to do it in-house, we've got to break it into manageable pieces. So this past year, we've been working on the economic development aspects of zoning, and that's what we'll be bringing to the May town meeting. For the rest of this calendar year, we're going to be working on the residential aspects of zoning and bring it to next year's town meeting. And then year 3, we'll work on whatever's left, your sign bylaw, your parking bylaw, whatever's left that needs doing. Next slide. So the work we've accomplished so far, back in March of last year, we held 2 public forums on economic development. It was geared mostly towards the performance zone, which is located in the south of Sterling along Route 140 near the I-190 interchange right over the border in West Boylston. Summer of last year, the planning board drafted the bylaw changes and we posted them online. We spent the fall going around to the town's various boards, commissions, and committees, explaining what we wanted to do and why we wanted to do it and get their feedback. And we had a very well-attended public forum back in November. We spent the winter revising our proposals based on the input received. So here we go. So the first zoning change we're pitching is the performance zone. It's 13 pages long, confusing to read, contradictory, and as such, it hasn't been used very much since it was put in place back in the 80s. I believe it was put in place because someone pitched a racetrack in town. Any historians here that know?
That's true.
Well, we are proposing to delete the performance zone and rename it the Gateway Enterprise District and add the allowable uses to the use regulation table in your zoning bylaw, and then add the district's dimensional requirements to the zoning bylaws table of dimensional controls. Next. Performance zone, 22 parcels of land, frontage on Route 140, and Leg Road and Dana Hill Road. Town water is available, but not sewer. It's 83 acres in size. You still have 25 acres available for new development, and the largest parcel is about 23 acres, and that's the nursing home. So this is the performance, this is the performance zone as it is today. We've got the greenhouse properties here. We've got the cemetery there. We've got the self-storage operation there. And there's the nursing home up there. Next slide. We're keeping with the same boundaries, except we're deleting 3 parcels. These 2 down at the bottom are owned by DCR and will never be developed. And we're also taking out the cemetery. Apparently, when the planning board tried to rezone this area a few years ago, there was a big hang-up at town meeting, people thinking that the cemetery might be developed for economic development. And while cemeteries are permanently protected, no matter how they're zoned, if that's going to be a hang-up, we'll just take the cemetery right out of the district. All right?
That's inaccurate. Mr. Shepherd was appalled at the thought that that cemetery would be surrounded by commercial development.
No, that's not what he said.
No, that's not what he said.
I actually recall that Dick Shepherd made comments, but also there were comments from Mr. Robert Tumar. And it was a general concern about the gateway perspective and concern about gateway. And there was some talk about the agricultural history and the fact that the founder of the Old Farmer's Almanac is actually buried in that cemetery. And I think most people in this town don't even know that. And not only is he buried there, his house stands between there and Oakdale, which I think is the village in West Boylston as you go towards the reservoir. It's only about a mile away, and they're putting bike lanes in there, and I can ride my bike probably 50 miles, and I know I can ride that mile, and I hope I can ride it when I'm 90, if it's safe. And if we're putting bike ped lanes in, we got to think about the reasons. And there's some people in America that care about the Old Farmer's Almanac, and they care about where somebody was born. That guy was born in Shrewsbury. It's a little further down the road beyond Oakdale, but you might be able to ride from Shrewsbury, where he was born and lived, I think. I think that's where the farmstead was. This guy cared about crops, and he was into astronomy.
I don't think
He
anyone's
lived in
talking about exhuming
and
them.
he lived in Shrewsbury, and then he lived later in life in Oakdale, and then he died in Sterling, and we don't know it, and we're not honoring by other than protecting that parcel. The surroundings matter. That's my point.
Everybody who would have a brain at those 2 town meetings knew the cemetery couldn't be developed. They were concerned that the area around the cemetery would be developed.
But it already is.
Yeah, but across the slope, and the Christoph house, the old Christoph house is across the street.
Right.
And there's open parcels around the Christoph house.
I recall
Everybody knows it.
I recall a guy named Jim French who said there's prime ag soil across the street, and I believe you could confirm with him that he was talking about the Christoph property.
He was. He was.
Okay, let's get back on track here. So for the new Gateway Enterprise District, we're proposing commercial uses that are already allowed in Sterling's commercial districts, plus some new uses that you told us you wanted back at the Economic Development Forums in March. In terms of new uses, let's see here. In terms of new uses for that area, food, farm, and/or craft cooperatives with products grown or manufactured on-site or off-premises, restaurants with or without outdoor patio seating, antique shops, breweries with restaurant and retail component, studios for arts and handcrafts, artisanal manufacturing, printing, binding, publishing, and related arts and trades. Now, there are some commercial uses that you allow in Sterling that we don't want for this area because you told us back at the forum in March that they're not appropriate for this area. And those are restaurants with drive-ins, motor vehicle service stations, motor vehicle repair or body shops, sale or rental of new or used cars indoors or outdoors, drive-in or freestanding ATMs, bus or railroad stations, rail or motor freight terminal bus storage yards, and open lot storage of building materials, contractors, and similar materials. So those are the uses that we're not going to allow in this district. In short, we want to make sure that this doesn't turn into Route 9 in Shrewsbury, where it's commercially zoned, stripped on either side. Sir.
Yeah, you had an earlier slide showing the relative cost of different types of development. And the cost of farming open space looked pretty promising. I believe it was plus 66 cents on the dollar, circa 2009. That frankly didn't look that bad compared. I know commercial industrial is a little higher, but when you consider retaining the character of a town as a rural town, that's a pretty small gap. So what assurance, if any, can be offered that any change in the bylaws would result in facilitation of more farming, rural uses?
Well, we're a right-to-farm community, and let's see here. So that means farming would still be allowed there. If people want to use that land for farming, they can.
Boss, I have a question about your permitted uses.
Yep.
Page 11 on your printout. The major commercial project. What's a major commercial project?
That is something that's 50,000 square feet or more in terms of floor space. What's that?
How many could there be in that area?
Well, that depends on what they need for parking and what the use would be.
Why don't you just call it commercial and not gateway enterprise district, since you said, it says right here, you can have major commercial projects.
If you want to call it the commercial zone, we can. I mean, it's just the name.
That's just a name after the town voted down a commercial zone twice there.
Well,
Who actually owns that property?
which property?
All of that? With Christoph, they sold it, didn't they? Who bought it?
I don't know rightly.
They sold the house and where the trucks were there, that's all they sold. I believe across the street, I think one of the Christophs, I'm not sure. Young guy lives up there, the car road goes up. And on the left-hand side, there's a couple of homes. I think one of them owns it, one of the Christophs still owns it.
I can answer that. So, the limited liability corporation bought the Christoph house and the Christoph lot, the house lot, and two adjacent properties. What's interesting is the town still has to assess to those limited liability corporations, but on the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Corporations Division lookup page, it says those limited liability corporations were dissolved in 2022. So I'd like to know what's happening in terms of the taxation on those parcels. Since apparently, according to the Secretary of the Commonwealth's corporation database, that LLC was dissolved.
Well, that would be a good question for our Board of Assessors.
I have a related assessor's question, and I think Mr. Gattens could be.
I looked up the GIS map a week ago. It says that those parcels are set to a limited liability corporation whose manager is based in Marblehead and whose state agent for service of process is a law firm in Boston. But the Secretary of the Commonwealth's corporations database says that the limited liability corporation was dissolved in 2022. So it's still on our tax rolls as limited liability corporation dissolved in 2022.
I believe I know who the owner is. I wasn't going to say it, but because of the confusion, I want to clarify. I believe it's an LLC, and I believe that their initials, it's like M and M. Maybe
Okay, we're getting into the weeds here.
M Holding or something like that, because it's just transferred. All of that land was sold. I know the price. I'm willing to discuss it with people one-on-one after the meeting.
Okay.
But I'd like to ask you individually what you think that land is worth.
I'm not an appraiser. Okay. So we've got 25 acres.
We're not in the real estate business?
Okay, Brian, stop.
Okay, sorry.
So you're running out of commercially zoned land. You're down to 20 acres. You're eating it up by residential development. If we make this commercial, we double the amount of commercially zoned land we have. If those 25 acres that are available for development get developed, it could bring in, conservatively estimated, up to $400,000 in new tax revenue. That's the point here. So let's move on.
If that value is that high, why didn't it just sell at a farmland price? It just sold at a farmland price. You know why? Because it's zoned Chapter 61. It's zoned as farmland.
And you can pull that out of the chapter program at any
We
time.
did not release it, and we're talking about development. It's unreleased property, and somebody just bought it all for $1 million. Good night. All of it, because we're asleep at the wheel. Good night. This is Brian Klein, 23 Brazil Road. This is my 30th year in Sterling. And if that's all you learned from me in my 30 years, good night and goodbye. I'm voting right now with my own feet.
You gotta be ashamed
Please
of
don't
yourself.
vote for me. They're my legs.
You gotta be ashamed of yourself.
All right.
Steve, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So what we're proposing to allow here in this zone is different than what is allowed in commercial zone.
Yes.
And what the planning board proposed is what came out of the meetings.
Yes.
Yes, so it's not the same as a commercial.
It's not. There are uses that you allow in your current commercial districts that we don't think are appropriate here, because that's what you folks told me back in March. So the second zoning change we're proposing is to delete residential development as a by right use in your commercial districts. And we covered why that is. You're slowly eating away your amount of commercially zoned land, and once it's gone, you're going to need to look at other areas, like we're looking at the Gateway District. So that's our second zoning proposal. Next. Okay. The permitting process for economic development projects is disjointed, lengthy, and often leads to conflicting conditions of approval. Right now, if a new business comes to town and it requires a special permit from the zoning board and site plan review from the planning board, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 months to get the special permit, then another 2 or 3 months to get site plan approval with the planning board. So that's a lot of time for a new business to wait to get up and running. Our idea is to expedite the permitting process and give applicants who need a special permit from the zoning board and site plan approval from the planning board the option to file for both permits at the same time and request a joint hearing of both boards. Initially, we had proposed moving the special permit granting authority over to the planning board. But the feedback we received was that not everyone was comfortable with that, especially the zoning board. A lot of folks like the idea of having a second pair of eyes review an economic development project. So over the fall, the planning board and the zoning board worked together and came up with this compromise suggestion. And that is, if you need both permits, you can apply for them both at the same time, and both boards will have a joint hearing.
If someone requests a joint hearing of both boards, will they automatically get it? Or is
Yes.
it up to one of the boards?
Both boards will coordinate, we'll set a meeting date. If this passes, I'm going to have town council put together a training module on how to hold a joint hearing. But this has been done in other communities, and I think it can work here in Sterling.
I do too. I just, I think it needs to be understood that if the applicant requests it, it will happen, not, you know.
That's how it's
saying,
written.
Yeah, I agree, and another board is saying, no, we don't agree.
No, that's how it's written.
Okay.
Mr. Wallace, I want to point out some, in my opinion, I think it's objectively true. What you put on the town news website is misleading and deceptive in terms of the town voters, and I'm going to tell you why. And it pertains to this. So your planner's explanation is this. Zoning bylaws, current site plan provision authorizes the planning board to adopt.
Okay, we're not on site plan yet. That's next. You want to hold that till we get to site plan?
Well,
Okay.
it's the site plan, it's the joint process of site plan and special permit.
Go ahead and ask your question.
All right, here's your opening paragraph, because it pertains to the special permit and the site plan review at the same time, all right? So here's your explanation on the town website. The zoning bylaws current site plan provision authorizes the planning board to adopt site plan regulations. Regulations are internal and housekeeping and procedural, and you know that, which the board has not done to this point. Revising the site plan section of the zoning bylaw will enable the planning board to include design guidelines in its new set of site plan regulations, again, which are internal, procedural, and can be amended or repealed or revoked by the planning board at any time. Further, much of the content of the existing bylaw can be moved into the regulation. So what you did when you click on what are supposedly regulations, you deleted current bylaw text and added bylaw text, okay? That is not regulation, that is bylaw change. You deceived the public about your intended bylaw changes that will be upcoming at the town meeting, all right? Then you propose to move substantive bylaw provisions into your regulations, which can then be amended, repealed, revoked, gutted by the planning board without a town meeting vote because they're internal. And you know that regulations are not bylaws and therefore can be amended or changed by the planning board without a 2/3 vote at the town meeting. So what you said on the website is completely deceptive.
Move on to the next one, please. So this is what you're talking about. Right now, Sterling's zoning bylaw does authorize the planning board to adopt site plan regulations. 99% of the communities out there have a planning board that has site plan regulations. They're authorized in the zoning, but then the planning board has a set of regulations. Every town around you has a set of site plan regulations. Site plan regulations typically describe such mundane things as what you need to show on a site plan, who has to prepare the plan for you, what you need to submit as part of your site plan package, the thresholds for environmental studies, the thresholds for traffic studies, and guidelines for how a site gets developed in terms of lighting, landscaping, parking, signage, building facades, all the things that come with a site design. You've never had site plan regulations in town before. So your site plan decisions have largely been based on who the applicant is before the board and the whims of whoever's sitting on the planning board at any given time. Folks, that's no way to design a site. You want to have a set of site plan regulations that articulate how you want to see a site designed. It's been my experience that developers will gladly build what you want if you articulate your standards in your site plan regulations. So the zoning proposal that we're proposing takes out of the bylaw a lot of the mundane stuff like what you need to show on a plan, who prepares it, the filing procedures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All that stuff is typically found in site plan regulations. And that's how it's done in towns all across Massachusetts except Sterling. You don't want to do it that way? We don't have to do it that way, but I'm trying to bring you in line with accepted planning principles.
The town meeting, the town people approved those procedures by a 2/3 vote, so they couldn't be monkeyed with, all right? So this is the existing zoning bylaw, 301-6.4.8, regulations. The planning board may adopt from time to time amend reasonable regulations for the administration of these site plan guidelines, all right? So those are procedural, as you just described. But if you move, which you're trying to do, if you click on your link and open up your proposed changes, is you're moving substantive stuff from the zoning bylaws into planning board regulations where they can be revoked, amended, repealed at the whim of the planning board and allow special, their special favorite developers to get their way, okay? So you just contradicted yourself. And let me point out another change you made, all right? You said in those changes that the planning board has 90 days to approve a site plan, but the ZBA has to issue its special permit before the site plan is even done, all right? That's ass backwards. You know why? Because the nitty-gritty facts are in the site plan review, and if some objectionable facts arise after the ZBA issues its special permit, then an abutter can only appeal to the courts from the special permit. There's no appeal from an effed up site plan review, okay? So you're not protecting the abutters either. So
Thank you, Mr. Gettens. So by allowing for the joint hearing, your zoning board's going to go into those hearings more informed than they are now, because they're going to have the town department reviews of the site plan and the planning board's engineering review of the site plan. Those are stuff that the zoning board does not have right now when they consider a special permit. So they're going to go into the special permit process having more information than they do now and can make a better and more informed decision on the special permit.
That's false based on the existing technical
Next.
bylaw.
So now we're on to two changes that are proposed by the building department. We're adding new and revised definitions to the zoning bylaws definition section. Some of our existing definitions are out of date, and we're missing a bunch of stuff that we should have defined in the first place. The second thing that the building department wants is placing some limits on the use of accessory structures in residential zoning districts. Apparently, there's been a problem with people in the residential district using their barns and garages to run businesses out of, creating problems between neighbors. and this is an attempt to tighten that up. Yes, sir.
If I could just double back to the joint hearing.
Yes.
And, applying for a permit. Is there any mechanism, if there's, say, someone's applying for a permit that would substantially alter the character of the town, however that might be defined, is there any mechanism that would allow the broader populace, the broader community, to also have a say, or is it simply a vote of the board?
Well, it's a vote by the zoning board. That's what a special permit does. They are voting to say, is this use compatible with the community and the neighborhood? That's what they're voting on when they vote for a special permit. And they do a good job of taking into account the feedback given by the people who attend that hearing, the abutters and the residents at large.
Now, this question, this might be beyond your scope here, but like say, one were to believe, as I do, that this should be left to an actual vote of the people, either at a town meeting or a referendum, who would have to enact that kind of requirement.
If it required a zoning change, then yes, it would go to town meeting.
Okay.
But if it's something that's allowed in town by special permit, it's the zoning board that's making the call, does this fit in with the neighborhood or not? And they can deny a special permit.
Mr. Wallace, I have some questions about these definitions. Can you tell me who, for example, who lobbied for the change to the frontage jet definition?
That would be the building commissioner.
The building commissioner. All right, so let's propose a hypothetical. We're in the neighborhood residential zone, and there are four streets forming a square, and in the middle of the square, there's like 3 acres of orchard land. And people bought the houses around that orchard land knowing that the present frontage requirement in neighborhood residential is 125 feet of continuous frontage on the street in order to have a buildable lot, all right? But the farmer who owned the orchard, he had a 40-foot strip here into his orchard, and then down on the other end of the street, he had 25 feet strip for his tractor, and a couple other places he had 30 feet. So now he's got a total of 125 feet. So under your changed definition, any one of those access points now makes that backland surrounded by residential houses a buildable lot. Do you think that's fair to the people that bought those houses when there was a straight line 125-foot frontage requirement? Do you think that's fair?
You can always use the property around the corner as your frontage.
Say that again, Carl.
You can always use the property. If you have property along one of your
I just said that all four
boundaries,
streets
and then there's
were
a
built
there's a
up.
public street that's next to that, you can use your frontage on there, and you can use your frontage going there. It's been like that forever.
It's 125 feet continuous, all right? So you're breaking
And
it up.
continuous allows you to go around the corner and follow your property.
I didn't say that. I said these strips are broken up and separated by other houses, all right? So you just bet, I didn't say that.
So if they have a total, taking all those little frontage pieces, then yeah, they could develop back
Yeah,
there.
under your change.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the people that bought there, all those houses around the open land, 2 or 3, say it's 2 or 3 acres of backland, right? They bought knowing that the frontage was 125 feet continuous, and they figured that backland was protected from development. So
Okay.
you really think this change is fair?
I can talk with the building commissioner and see if he'd prefer to keep the old one.
Why isn't he here?
He doesn't work nights.
And by the way, under family, why is there now no cap on what constitutes the number of family members?
Because that's state law. That's state law.
Is that because of MBTA zoning?
No, that's been state law for a while now.
So
That's why we're updating
in
your
a dwelling
definitions.
now, there can be unlimited number of occupants.
Next one. Okay. We also have to revise our accessory dwelling bylaw to comply with the Massachusetts Affordable Homes Act of 2024, and that sets statewide standards for accessory dwelling units. Now we have to allow ADUs in all single-family districts and allow them by right if they're 900 square feet in size or less, and prohibit owner occupancy requirements and allow ADUs in detached accessory structures. So we worked with town council to revise the bylaw, and we're almost there. There's just one last hang-up that we're working out with the zoning board, and that is what the setback requirement should be for accessory dwelling units in existing accessory buildings. Should it be 25 feet, the way it is for, that's a setback for single-family homes, or because the accessory building exists, should we make it a little less? We're having that debate now. We're hopeful that we can resolve it with the zoning board at next week's planning board meeting. Next issue. And lastly, we need to update our floodplain zoning bylaw. We're getting new flood rate insurance maps this year. The last edition of our flood rate insurance maps are from 1982 and are way out of date. In order to use the new maps and continue our participation in the federal flood insurance program, we need to revise our floodplain zoning bylaw and put in some new standards for building in flood zones. Questions?
Is the need to update the flood zone maps from 82 to 25 because the information available to us is more accurate?
Yes.
Why would wetlands change?
They change all the time. What was flooding 40 years ago may not be flooding now. With climate change, I'm going to guess that we have more land in the flood zone now than we did 40 years ago. I'm having the Planning Commission prepare a set of before and after maps so I can see exactly where the changes are and how much land is in the new district. And I'll have that for town meeting for sure. So next steps, Planning Board will meet next Thursday night to discuss the feedback we received at this forum. We're going to hold a required public hearing on Thursday, March 13th to finalize the zoning proposals and then forward them to town meeting. Ta-da! That's it, folks. That's what we're doing this year. We hope you support what we're going to bring to town meeting. You are more than welcome to attend the planning board meetings and give your feedback. My door is always open. You can call me, you can email me, and I'll be glad to talk to you anytime. All right? Thank you, everyone. Grab a cookie and a drink on your way out, and see you at town meeting.